Albert, thank you so much for joining me today. Appreciate you being here and speaking for the ranchers on Point Reyes since they really can't speak for themselves.
Thank you for having me, Keely.
So let's start with you and your background. Straus Family Creamery is, I believe, the first organic creamery in the United States. Is that right?
We were the first, so my dairy farm, which is outside the park, but on Tomales Bay, was the first certified organic dairy west of the Mississippi River. And our creamery was the first 100% organic creamery in the United States back in 1994. Since then, almost 90% of the dairies in Marin Sonoma County are certified organic, and we produce over half the organic milk in California.
You've been truly, as far as I can tell, the most vocal advocate for these guys, partly because they are gagged. They can't really speak for themselves. So can you tell me a little bit about your involvement and why you've been working so hard to help these ranchers and farmers?
So my mission and the mission of the creamery is to help sustain family farms in Marin Sonoma County by providing high quality organic dairy products that are minimally processed, and to help revitalize rural communities through education and advocacy everywhere. And we've seen a demise of our farms. In 1940, there were 4.6 million dairy farms in the United States. Now there are less than 26,000 left. And so family farms, smaller family farms, are in a decline, rapid decline, as well as our rural communities. So we're losing the basic ability to produce high quality food locally and keep our communities together. I've worked on ag work and affordable housing. I've worked on keeping our farms intact and our critical infrastructure to support the farms, which are like feed mills and repair people, different people in the community, which we're losing all that. We're on the tipping point of losing everything. So for me, it's my home, it's my business, it's my livelihood. And the community I love, saying that we're polluting, we're inhumane. Animal certified organic standards address animal welfare. We're all under very tight environmental controls and permits. And so there's no pollution. So all this made up science and lawsuits against farmers is just to drive them out of business, and mainly livestock and dairy farmers.
Marin County, most people would associate that with San Francisco, where our governor lives. But for you, Marin County is agricultural, and that's its history, and that's truly the history of the area. Can you tell me a little bit about Marin County as you were growing up, how you've watched it change?
My father started our dairy farm in 1941, and my parents worked their whole lives to facilitate a dialogue between farmers, environmentalists, community members, and government to come up with a common vision and a common strategy for the future. And my mother was a co-founder of the first agricultural land trust in the nation, Marine Agricultural Land Trust, or MALT. And since then, they've preserved over half the farmland in Marin County to stay in agriculture in perpetuity. We supported the formation of the Point Reyes National Seashore because it had a balance of agriculture, wilderness, and then reintroducing some elk to a preserve. And then we supported the Coastal Commission formation to preserve the coast because it had the balance. They're supposed to protect and promote agriculture, rural communities, in balance with public access and tourism. But it's become very polarized towards open space, tourism at the expense of the community and farms and food, ability to have food production.
Right. So when Point Reyes National Seashore, and this is the part that I think can be difficult to understand when people hear about the 12 ranchers being evicted, they live on a seashore that was designated in the 60s, 50s or 60s as public land. But that was always with the vision of maintaining agriculture in Marin County, correct? That was the part of the founding of the park.
Yeah, I mean, the founding of the park was the seashore, which is different than a park, had in the founding legislation that there was a pastoral zone, that it was supposed to be agricultural, and that was supposed to continue on. There's been a narrative that this was never meant to be, but that's not accurate. It was about 25% of the agricultural land in Marin County and agricultural output. And so we're losing all that. We've lost it over the last few decades. because of the pressures that the Park Service has put on these farms to restrict their ability to have a business and be able to stay in their houses.
These are exactly the kind of farms and ranches that we've been talking about lately. This is a regenerative model. You were in Paris last year, I believe. You've really led the climate smart movement in dairy. You've been just a huge part of the regenerative agriculture movement. So these are our ideal farms and ranches that we're losing. Can you tell the audience a little bit about that?
I've been working on an organic carbon neutral farming model for the last decade, a couple decades actually. And so we have a program for all our 13 dairies to be carbon neutral by 2030 off of practices. We're well on the path. My own dairy is over halfway to carbon neutrality, where the milk coming from our dairies will have an equal or lower carbon footprint than any plant-based dairy alternative. And then last October, the United Nations, FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and the International Dairy Federation asked me to come to the Paris World Dairy Summit to sign on to an international declaration of collaboration around climate change and sustainability in dairy. And we're the smallest organization in the world, but they're saying that our model is a model for the world. In the next 25 years, we have to produce as much food to feed almost 10 billion people as we have in the last 10,000 years combined. And that dairy and livestock products are essential nutrients to feeding the world. And that local production is essential, so we're not shipping food all over the world. And the fact is we're importing most of our food into the United States now. So it's not sustainable. What we're doing in Marin County and Sonoma County has been a model for the world. We've had the history of working together. Now we're polarized as a society, and we need to get back together to have this dialogue and this collaboration around a common vision and common future, and get back to a strategy that we can all agree on to move our food and farming system forward.
Absolutely. So when you lose farms like this, when you lose ranches like this, you're losing local food. And this is generational knowledge. These guys have been here for generations. They're part of the community. They're part of the culture. They're part of the reason why the park is pristine and beautiful and a place that people want to see. Do you think that the Park Service has welcomed ranchers, or do you think that the Park Service doesn't see their mission as compatible with agriculture?
I think that it's the latter. The Park Service and these organizations have a very different view of what parks and open space. I mean, it's not only we see land trusts and county, state, and federal parks taking animals off. I found out this California state park system doesn't allow grazing of any kind because they're worried about weeds, even by goats and sheep. And historically, we've always had cattle grazing those, which created income for the state. And now they have all this dry fodder that is just prime for wildfires. We never used to have wildfires every year.
California state parks does not allow any grazing at all on their.
That's what I was just told by one of the managers of one of the state parks. So, so it's a disconnect between people that don't know where the food comes from. I think that we haven't done our part to educate the public around farming, how food's produced, and so we need to get back onto a track where we're educating the public, showing them how we farm, that we do it humanely, we don't pollute, and we have a system that's really an example. So I think that's something that I take on as part of what we need to do is educate the public and really show them that which I used to do all the time and got disconnected. We also have to stop having farms being a target of lawsuits to drive them out of business. This litigation around Point Reyes is displaced all these families and farms and not giving them a landing point to where they could start farming somewhere else. They say, oh, well, you have 15 months to leave, yet that's not enough to start another farm, move an operation. There's a lack of understanding that farms can't be just moved from one place to another overnight. it takes a long time, and we're identifying farms that we can move these dairies to, and beef cow ranches. Beef cow are a lot easier to move than dairy cows, but having the milking facilities, having the housing facilities, having feed storage and the infrastructure needed takes money and time, and this is not one of the luxuries we have right now. So I think there's a disconnect about what it takes to farm, what are the benefits of it, and how do we kind of work together and support a local farming and food system that's really been sustainable. California wants to put organic food in all public schools, yet they're not working together with us to help that happen. We're losing farms, and we're short of organic milk now.
There is an organic milk shortage in California, right? I've been seeing
All
those signs.
Across the country, actually.
Across the country, wow. Can you talk a little bit about the pressures that the farmers have been experiencing for the past few years? They can't speak for themselves. They're gagged in this lawsuit, but this has been a long process for them. They've been dealing with a lot of harassment, like you referenced, from these environmental groups and so on.
From taking water quality samples during a drought that had no water flowing in the creeks, saying that the dairies were polluting, and using that to create more regulations and more pressure on the dairies, reducing the number of animals they could have on their land with no data to support that. Actually should have a lot more animals, so they couldn't have enough animals to make an economic unit. They didn't allow pasture improvement, either seeding, mowing. They ended up taking silage land away, so you had to be reliant on outside feed a lot more. There was, infrastructure they weren't allowed to improve, roofs and, a lot of the houses. And then when there was problems with the septic systems that the park was supposed to fix, they blamed the farmer. And then the elk have been just not managed and released all over the farmland, which one dairy cost over $100,000 a year just to feed them, because they took the alfalfa hay from the cows, and they broke all the fences and ate all the pastures. And so it's been a constant long-term pressure, and just wore these farmers and people out to where they came in with a settlement. And I think that was the best outcome that the rancher could see, because the Park Service was not a landlord that worked with them.
Do you think that these environmental groups were complicit with the Park Service in trying to get these ranchers out?
What it appears to be is the three litigants, environmental groups that sued the park 3 years ago for the second time, and the ranchers and dairies joined the lawsuit on the side of the park, but the park was negotiating against them. And so I think this has been a challenge when you have a behind closed doors mediation, when there's supposed to be a middle ground. There was no middle ground. It was either all or nothing. It turned out to be all or nothing. And they were supposed to get 20-year leases, and they end up with nothing. And so I think that's not a middle ground that sustains the farms, the community, or the food system. That's been really a model of how to farm. And now they're scrambling to figure out how to mitigate against wildfires. And now the park is talking about all the practices they disallowed, mowing, having some beef cows on the ranches, but they're still evicting people out of their houses. I've documented that over 130 houses have been destroyed over the last 50 years by the Park Service, and they're about to destroy another 50. And
in California, in the United States,
in Point Reyes National Seashore.
Point Reyes National Seashore, they've destroyed.
And GGRA, which they manage, the National Park Service manages right adjacent to it. So it's devastated our community, where we lost 35% of school-aged children over the last decade, 41% of our high school students. We're about to lose another quarter, at least, of our students. We did a study that we needed 1,000 affordable housing units in West Marin. Yet at the same time, the county and the state have put over 1,000 units into short-term rentals. So no one can afford to live and work in the community. Over 80% of the workforce commutes in, and it's just not sustainable. There's no affordable housing, and we're just on the verge of collapse. These actions are putting a stake in the heart of our community. And it's really a devastating time that we need to work together to salvage what we have and be able to start building again.
Why is the Park Service doing this?
I can't talk to their motivation.
Has there been any evidence from any of these studies that there's any environmental damage to the park from these ranchers and farms?
No, I mean, I think that the farms are actually an asset to the park and to the environment. And we've shown that we live in harmony with nature, not adversely. And farms, which have been there over 150 years, have been the thing that actually kept nature intact in a form that the public can enjoy. There's studies that show that grazing is essential to not only promoting native plants and wildlife, but also endangered species. So I think that there's a disconnect, and we need to kind of get back together and work together on this, because we're going the wrong direction.
Has there been any help from California state politicians or any representatives, Marin County politicians? Have any political representatives sided with the farmers or tried to help them?
No.
Do you think the message Marin County is sending is this is a place for billionaires and the wealthy, and agriculture isn't welcome here?
It becomes a playground for the rich. And, I think that's something that in history is not going to be looked at as a positive step. It makes me very sad that this is the direction we're going.
Do you think this is an isolated incident from the National Park Service, or are you seeing evidence of a pattern in government against production, agriculture, and grazing on our public land?
This is not isolated. This is happening all over the country. In Paris, they said it's taken us 5 years to show that dairy and livestock parks are really a positive influence on the environment, where a vegan diet was what a lot of people are advocating for as a solution to climate change, which is not accurate or real. And so we're now going back to a understanding that livestock and animals and dairy products are really essential. And cows are a part of the solution. When you look in the scope of where the issues are, wildfires aren't even accounted for in the carbon inventory. Globally emit 2.5 times the amount of carbon than all the fossil fuels in the world.
So why haven't the farmers been able to speak? What can you say about their gag order? I know you can't speak for them, but what have you observed?
The mediation should last maybe a week or two. This has been 3 years. So they just kind of wore ranchers, dairymen out. So the gag order was threatened, by different people that there were repercussions if they did talk, and so they were scared.
What kind of repercussions?
I can't talk to that, but I think that it was. I assume it was, severe enough that people were afraid to talk. Community was unaware of what was going on and shocked when this announcement was made a couple weeks ago. And when we had a whole public process that showed 20-year leases, it was in balance with environmental needs. It was going to be a positive thing for the community. Now we have businesses, schools, churches are all going to be, if not closed, will be greatly diminished in our community. And so the very thing that the public wants to see is going to be gone.
So you're saying the public didn't have any input in this process?
Not in the mediation or the solution to terminate all these leases.
Some of the pushback I've heard is this is a voluntary agreement. The ranchers want this. The farmers want this. I know, again, you can't speak for them. We all saw Kevin Lunny's emotion at that town hall. I think people can draw their own conclusions. But what would you say to folks who say this is voluntary, this is what the farmers and ranchers want?
I think that's the narrative that the Park Service wants on this, and the Nature Conservancy. The farmers didn't want to leave their home over, multi-generations. They didn't want to leave their businesses, but not having a landlord that was really there working with them was not sustainable.
And as you work with these farmers and ranchers to relocate, there's no public number that's been made in terms of settlement, but did they get enough to relocate?
No. I think they got enough money to maybe buy a house in the city. I mean, a part of a house. I mean, it's like there are multiple members of these families. So whatever settlement was split up between multiple people. So it wasn't that much money at the end, and not enough to get to buy another farm or to lease another farm and move to another place. So I think this is not a good settlement, and it's not a good indicator of how we're supporting our farms and our communities.
This seems that if this has been going on for 3 years and there was suddenly a big push in January 2025 to get this done, what does that say to you about maybe some pressure to wrap this up before a new administration came in? Is that implied here?
I think it was very obvious that that's what the intent was, to get it done before the new administration got into power.
And maybe that, I'll just speculate here, did that play into some of the pressure that you said that they experienced, not just to stay quiet, but also to sign by a certain date?
Simple answer is yes.
Okay. So what's next for these ranchers? Is there any hope for them? What options do they have? Can we, as a community, now that we know about this, now that we're informed, people are angry. The response, even online, has been overwhelming. People are very upset about this. This does not seem to be what the public wants. What options do these farmers and ranchers have? How can we help them?
Well, we're looking at a multiple approach. One is to see if the administration will reverse this direction in this decision. The other one is there's a couple lawsuits still in play. And the third is to create public awareness and support these farms. And the fourth thing is we're looking at, with intention, how we can relocate these dairies and farms, ranches, within our community, so we're not losing our community as well. But that's going to take time and money, which we're not afforded time with this settlement. We have 6 to 9 months essentially to move the dairies, and that's not enough time to find a defunct dairy that we need to fix up, and that all takes time and money. And so I am asking and urging the Nature Conservancy to give more time for these ranchers and dairies to move, just make it impossible to relocate, keep them going in production. And then we need to raise money. And so I figured for all these ranches and dairies, the 12 to be relocated, probably $80 to $100 million. It's $5 to $10 million per dairy. And it's, the beef cow ranches is, land's not cheap. And a lot of people don't have land that they can lease either around.
And this land that they've been on, again, for 150 years, the Nature Conservancy took over the leases. They're talking about bringing in grazing contractors anyways, right? So you have to spend all this money and effort to move these local food sources only to be replaced by grazing contractors. What is the logic here?
I think it's very short-sighted and not really understanding what it takes to farm and produce food. And I think they're only trying to mitigate against wildfires. And I don't think they have experience of how to do that.
It's interesting that this is happening right now because the world is changing. People are starting to appreciate animal products more in our diet. There's been more coming out about that. People are starting to appreciate the importance of grazing in the wake of these LA fires. So this feels almost like really outdated, this approach. And it just feels like a relic of a mindset that we've grown out of, to relocate these guys, but we can't reverse it. Once they're gone forever.
It's going to be very hard to reverse this whole trend. We have, as I said before, we have county, state, and federal parks that are taking all animals off. It's millions of acres by now, and we have wildfires every year. I advocated for using livestock in Sonoma and Marin counties 7+ years ago after the wildfires in Sonoma County. That was on a committee showing that It can be an income source for government and the public, at the same time mitigating its wildfires and producing food. Whereas these contracts of sheep and goats can do about 5% of what's needed and cost millions of dollars for taxpayers. So I think just thinking through these things, and really what I say is, yes, we have climate change, but we have to manage differently. Climate change is not a reason not to look at how we manage our lands, how we produce our food, and how we can do both at the same time and really make it positive and work, as I say, in harmony with nature. So it's not that we're adverse to each other. We can all work together to make a better future. We need to do a better job of educating the public about where the food comes from, how it's farmed, and that it's so important that we have this resource here in Marin and Sonoma counties. And actually, we're not unique to everywhere around the country and around the world. Local farming and food systems are endangered everywhere. How do we work together to make that change? And the path we're going down is not working. We see more, climate changes. We have more extreme weathers. Yes, let's work together on the solutions. Part of the practices I have, I've converted our vehicles to electric on my farm. I have a methane digester where we capture the manure from the cows and produce all electricity for the farm, and the electric vehicles where I have a truck that feeds the cows that's powered by the cow's waste. I have a electric loader. I have electric skid steer. I drive electric cars for over 20 years. So I think there's ways we can address climate change and use farms as a solution. We did the first commercial trial in the United States for feeding red seaweed to cows. Feeding a quarter pound of this one variety of red seaweed, you can get in a 45-pound diet, you can get that result of a 95% reduction in enteric methane, which is the belches from the cows. We were the first dairy to have a carbon farm plan by adding compost to the land, using animals to rotational graze. You're building the organic matter in soil, which grows more grasses and more crops, that pulls carbon from the atmosphere and puts it back in the soil through photosynthesis. And that's being recognized internationally as one of the only ways to reverse climate change, rather reduce it, by pulling carbon from the atmosphere and put it back in the soil. And so my assertion is livestock has an essential role in reversing climate change. So I think these practices are all essential to a farming and food system that is a benefit to the planet and our community.
What a tragedy to lose 12 examples of this. For the ranchers to stay, if that were even an option, I'm sure they wouldn't really want to stay unless they know that their landlord is behind them. So it seems like we need to start calling for change at the National Park Service in our approach to public land. We can't just expect our public lands to be places where we recreate or we look. We need to have an understanding that these spaces can be used to feed us and to grow timber and all of these different things. The models that you're describing work everywhere. It would be amazing if the public could start to change its perspective of these shared public lands.
I agree. And I think that we need to share these practices, this viewpoint, and this opportunity that we have to the greater public and our consumers and our legislators. We need to kind of all be working together. We need leadership that really helps us see this vision and this future, working together with us.
If people want to help get involved, if people are touched by the story of Point Reyes ranchers and they want to reverse this, what can they do right now? Is there any call to action?
We're developing that, but I think that we will be reaching out. I'm sure we'll be reaching out to the new administration, new Secretary of Interior who oversees the Park Service, to ask for a change in direction. And exactly what you said. How do we look at these as opportunities and a different vision of how the Park Service works?
Yeah, for a growing population that needs to be more self-sustaining and continue to feed ourselves from farms like yours, leadership led by farmers and ranchers who understand really what's at stake and how to do it right.
I think the other challenge is farmers are getting older. The average age is 60 years old. There's like 1% of the population that's feeding everybody. we don't have a next generation unless we really do it with intention. We need to address issues urgently and really look to the future. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Albert. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Keely.